We're just finishing setting up right now. So just give me a couple of seconds and we'll get started. Can everybody hear me? Send me a message on the chat and let me know you can hear me. I'm just sending out a message right now. Okay. Okay, so can the viewers who are logged in now, can you hear me? Does it sound good? Send me a message. If you're not logged in, you have to log in order to send a message. Okay, somebody send me one message real quick and then we'll get started. Just want to make sure the sound is straight. Okay, cool. Alright, so mi chiamo Medinde Odwirafo Kwesi Nehem Ptah Akan and AKANFO NANASOM Da. That means, greetings, my name is Odwirafo Kwesi Nehem Ptah Akan. I'm the Odwirafo of Akwamu Mine and Marukai Tifimu, which means the Akwamu Nation in North America. AKANFO NANASOM is ancient, authentic Akan ancestral religion. So we are on number 8 in our installment of the Akradin Abosom, the Abosom that govern the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that govern the Akan 7-day week, or Awotwe. Awotwe. Does anybody have any questions first on the last session that we did on Nana Yaa from the previous installment? Anybody have any questions on that? Okay, we put the link to the article on Nana Yaa. Akradinbosom is up there. So this is the information that we're going to be basing this particular session on. So there are no questions. Just want to check. All right. So we went through, so far we went through the Abosom Awusi, which is the Abosom, which is Alsar, governing the major Abosom operating through the sun on the masculine side. We went through Ajwa, the major female Abosom operating through the moon on the feminine side, which is Uatchet in ancient Kamit. So Alsar and Uatchet are Awusi and Ajwa. When they're in connection with Ra and Ra'et, they operate through the sun. So it's Awusi Da, Esi Da. So Awusi and Esi is Alsar and Uatchet when they're operating through the sun. So it's Awusi Da Sunday. Outside of being connected with the sun, they're connected with the moon as Ajo and Ajowa, which is Alsar and Uatchet. And so that gives us Joada, which is Monday. We also have, we went through Tuesday, which is Benada, Abenada. We talked about Abena, which is Sekhmet, and Bena, who is Heru Behudet, which is Ogun in the Yoruba tradition. Then we went to Wednesday, which is Awukuda, Akwada. We talked about Awuku, who is Kweko Anansi, who is Eshu, who is Set in ancient Kemet. And then we talked about, next we talked about Akua, who is Agberu in the Yoruba tradition. She is Nebet-Het in ancient Kemet. And then we talked about Yao last week, who is Heru in ancient Kemet, and Shango in the Yoruba tradition, and Hevioso in the Vodun tradition, or Sogbo in the Vodun tradition. So now those were the first 7, and now we're going to talk about Nana Yaa. And Yaa, and also the Abosom Nana Aaba. These are 2 twin female Abosom. We're going to talk about, even though they're twins, we're going to talk about Yaa this week. We're going to talk about Aaba next week, but since they're intertwined and they're connected, we'll be mentioning Aaba throughout the piece. And I should give you the article for, let me type in an article for Aaba just so you can see. All right, let me see. Okay. All right. So, okay, y'all got that? All right. So you can download those articles now, and you can follow along with some of the basic information, and then you can type some of your questions in. But with Nana Yaa, now we talked about the 7 days of the Akan week are governed by the Oriya, the sun, the Osarane, or sometimes called the Bosom, the moon, and then the 5 major planets. So we talk about for Benna, the planet Benna, which is they call Mars in English, the planet Awuku or Akua, which they call Mercury in English, the planet Yao, which they call Jupiter in English for Thursday, Yaada, the planet Afi, which they call Venus in English, and the planet Main, which they call Saturn in English. So when we talked about Yao, the Abosom who governs the planet Yao, and Yaada, which is Thursday, Yao's day, Thursday, there's also, that's Yaa, which is Heru, but then there's also the female Abosom who govern, major Akradinbosom who govern that particular planetary body. So just like with Benna and Abena, which is Heru Behudet and Segmet, Benna and Abena, they govern, male and female, govern the planet Benna, which they call Mars, and then you have Awuku and Akua, or Aku and Akua, which is Set and Nebehet, and they govern the planet. They're together, the planet Awuku or Akua, which is Mercury. Then you have Yao, who governs the planet, which is Heru, who governs the planet Heru Upsheta, which is the planet Jupiter. That's Yao. But then the female Abosom are Yaa and Aaba. Now we're going to focus on Yaa. Yaada, which means Yao's day, which is the day of Yao, which is Thursday. That's one title of the day, but the title is also Yaada, which means Yaa's day, or the day of Yaa, which is Uatchet, actually in ancient Kamit. So we're going to deal with her primarily. But the other part about that is, just like there are the 5 different planets, plus the sun and the moon, which govern the 7-day week, and the planetary home of, we talked about the planetary home of Heru is the planet Yaa. We also talked about the solar home of Heru being the core of the sun, and the earthly home of Heru being the core of the earth. So just like Yaa and Aaba connected to Heru, actually as wives of Heru, they operate through that planet Yao, also called Yaa, and therefore Yaada, or Thursday, the feminine aspect. They also have their own planetary homes, and that's what we're going to talk about first. So Yaa, and you'll see this in the article, Yaa is the Abosom of the planet Yao and Yaa, governs Yaada, Thursday. She is associated with that which is fierce. She's an attacker, relentlessly assails disorder, a fighter, a protectress of divine sovereignty, along with her twin sister Aaba. Yaa and Aaba are Nekabet and Uatchet, or actually flip it around, Uatchet and Nekabet in ancient Kamit. So they are protectresses of royal sovereignty. They are fierce attackers. They protect the 2 lands, the Tawi, which means upper and lower Kamit, north and south Kamit, but also Kamit and Kamit, which is Nubia. Those are the 2 lands, but then later on it became just southern and northern Kamit, dealing with the Tawi of the 2 lands. So they are the divine protectresses of that royal united front, that land, that nation. Okay, now she also deals with fighting and punishment. So we talked about Yaa last week. Yaa is the feminine aspect. We talked about how the term Yaa means to fight, to attack, to affront, to shy, to scold. But then Yaa also means pain or affliction. Yaa is the feminine term, and it means exactly the same thing: to affront, to attack, to fight. But it also means pain or affliction. Now, like we said last week, pain is not something negative with respect to our culture. We have a pain center in our brains. It's very critical that we have that, because if you, like we said before, if you put your hand on a hot stove and you didn't have a working pain center, then your hand would just burn up. But it's because you have a pain center, it's registered, you automatically snatch your hand back. It's an alarm system. It's a preemptive, it helps you to preempt situations that would become worse. It can help you stop negative situations before they start or before they progress. So pain is not a negative thing. In fact, pain, and Yao means pain, Ya means pain, to either suffer from pain or to inflict pain, to be afflicted with pain or to inflict pain in harmony with divine order. So just like your immune system attacks disordered cells, you also have that pain center that, and we'll talk about how she operates, Ya and Aaba operate through the trachea and stuff like that. So fighting, punishment, protectresses of royal sovereignty, but they also govern the magnetosphere, the divine magnetosphere. So the magnetosphere is the electromagnetic field surrounding the planet, governed by the north and the south poles. And those northern and southern poles are governed by Ya and Aaba, Uatchet and Nekabet, the feminine aspect of those two polar energies. And since they're the two polar energies, they govern the magnetosphere. And just like they govern the magnetosphere around Asase-Afuya, the earth, they also govern your magnetosphere, which is your aura. Okay, the electromagnetic field that emanates from you as your auric egg. So they govern that. We talked about the etymology in ancient Kamit about showing that Ehya means pain or affliction, but it also means to fight, to attack, fighter, and so forth. So that's Yao and Yao. We have the Medutu, or the hieroglyphs, to show the connection between those two. But let's look at the name Uatchet and the planet. Now, the planet itself is Uranus. Now, that's her planetary home. But because she's in connection as Heru and Uatchet, connected as husband and wife, united as king and queen, and then Aaba as well. So you have those three, that royal family. They're connected with the planet Yao as well, and she's called Ya. But her planetary home is the planet Ya, which they call Uranus in English. It takes on a greenish hue, sometimes a bluish greenish hue or a greenish hue. That's interesting because Uatchet, the root of her name, watched means the green one, and she's called the green one. And her papyrus scepter is what she takes into battle is a green scepter, and it's called watch. It also means to expand, expansive power. So she's the green one who operates through the green planet, the greenish planet. And then her sister, Aaba, who is Nekabet, operates through the planet Nekabet, which we call Aaba or Nekabet, which they call Neptune, and it takes on a bluish hue. And what you'll find is Nekabet, when we talk about her next week, Aaba, that bluish color is sacred to her. It's sacred to her, it's sacred to sovereignty, rulership, and so forth. So those two planets, Uranus and Neptune, the greenish and the bluish-greenish planets, are the planetary abodes of Uatchet and Nekabet, or Ya and Aaba. Now, that's important because when you're reading about Akan traditions, you'll often find, first you'll find that the Akradinbosom, there are many Akan people because of the idiocy of Christianity Islam, Hebrewism, Hinduism even, and so forth, or white pseudo-spirituality and pseudo-humanism and things like that. They have nothing to do with any Abosom at all, many of them, because they've been taught that that's evil, that's primitive, you don't want to have anything to do with that. They worship Jesus and things like that. Then you have some people who still deal a little bit with the traditional culture, but they're so caught up in dealing with wayward spirits, talismanic magic, and things like that, that they're not dealing with actual Abosom. They've been overrun by little shrines, little talismans of spirits that have been accrued from people coming from the north, and people just dealing with wayward spirits, trying to get a little bit of psychic power, that they're not dealing with actual Abosom. So it has degenerated to the point, because of those two separate influences. On one hand, the pseudo-religious practices, on the other hand, which influence the people who are running around selling talismans and little shrines to spirits that are not really deities, and taking people's money and taking advantage of people and things like that. Because of all of that, a lot of people don't deal with real Abosom, and because of all that, some people, they're raised to believe that they're not named after any Abosom. These Abosom of the 7 days of the week, they don't think they even exist. They just think that they're named after the days of the week, and that's it. Then you have some people who understand, okay, there is a spiritual connection to the different days of the week. They understand that there are mrane, or praise names, connected to the different days of the week. They understand that there may be some spiritual forces operating through the planets and the sun and the moon, but then the only thing they repeat is very often some information they've been given by Europeans, or some limited information that they received from some of their relatives or some previous Ghanaians or Akan people who've written a few things about the culture. So they only deal with 7 Abosom. They'll mention Awusi, they'll mention Ajua or Ajo, they'll mention Bena, Awuku, Yao or Awo, or sometimes Abrao, they will call him, Afi, and Amen, which is actually Amen man. They don't know who these Abosom are. They haven't connected them to ancient Kamit, which we have, and we've proven with the different articles that these are the exact same divinities with the same names. But they focus on those 7 because they studied some things, they read some older texts, they saw that the Babylonians dealt with deities of 7 days of the week, and they related those divinities to the ones that we're named after, and that's all they dealt with. And that's as far as they went with it. And we've done the same thing, but as well. But then when we looked deeper into it, we understood that, for example, Awuku governs Wednesday, Awuku Da, Kwekwenanse, the Abosom that governs the planet Awuku or Mercury. But we also understood that Set, the same divinity, he has a wife, Nebuhet. And when we first, Abosom herself, Nana Akua, let us know that she's actually Abosom and she needs to be venerated and communicated with and invoked just like her husband, just like Awuku needs to be invoked. We found that Setchima or Sekhmet, Abena, Abra, she is an Abosom, and she informed us, of course, that she is the female counterpart. She's Abena, the female counterpart to Bena. She needs to be invoked, and she is one of the Akradinbosom. The same thing with the Yaa and Aaba. In the Akan, many Akan writings, which many of people there's a couple of writers that write some information, and everybody else references those same people whenever they're writing about Akan culture. So even if you Google it on the internet, what happens is, or just do research in the library, you will find that people are basically referencing the same little small group of writers who were writing some information a few years ago, some decades ago, some a few years ago, but it's the same information. So it's the same with Yaa and Aaba. These are actual Abosom. These are forces in nature. These are female divinities. These are our mothers that we communicate with and are part of our spiritual development. We cannot live in harmony with order without dealing with these Abosom. All of the Abosom deal with us, and as we said before, some of them will be, you'll have one that's governing your Kra, your Okra, your Ka, your Kaet. But all of them are connected, just like all of your organs are connected, and they're all interdependent upon one another. So we deal with the energy of all of the Abosom, even though we come through one specific, we're assigned to a specific Abosom to execute our specific function in creation. But that function is supported when we're connected to all of the Abosom. So Yaa and Aaba are actual Abosom. They informed us and showed us why they are actually Abosom and exactly who they are in ancient Kamit, who they are in the Yoruba tradition, who they are in the Phone tradition, so that we can see and we can give that information out so people can do the research, so that we can begin including them in our invocations. So Uatchet and Nekabet, we have the etymologies in the article. They are called, Uatchet is called Oya in the Yoruba tradition. She's called Avedji Da in the Vodun tradition. And of course, Yaa in Akan culture. And Aaba is called Oba, the wife of Shango, first wife of Shango in the Yoruba tradition. And she's called Ayaba in the Vodun tradition. So that's just, gives a baseline of where that comes from. We're giving the information out because it hasn't been published before. For the small percentage of people who actually know something about the Akradinbosom, which many people don't deal with them, they still don't have the information about those other four. They have the seven, Awusi, Adwa, Bena, Awuku, Yao, Afi, and Amen, but they don't have Abena, they don't have Akua, they don't have Yaa, and they don't have Aaba. So we're giving that information out so to make it complete. These 11 Akradinbosom, that's the full set, that's the full complement of Abosom. Now, when we talk about Yaa, well, first of all, do you have any questions? Okay, no questions on that? Okay, we're going to go forward. So, we talked about Yaa dealing with one of the praise names, deals with confrontation, aggression, warlike, protector, and so forth. And we talked about they are govern the Magnetosphere, the southern pole and northern pole of the planet. And then, of course, your body has a southern and a northern pole. The electric energy and the magnetic energy that combines to be the electromagnetic energy. This is the energy of the Magnetosphere that governs your body, that governs the planet, Asasi Afuya, Earth, and also governs the great divine body of Inyame wa Inyame, which is Amenet, Amen, the Supreme Being. So, just like they have that energy complex within their divine body, we have that in miniature in our body. It is a governmental structure. And as a governmental structure, it facilitates stability on the planet. Now, because of the movement of the Earth, the revolutions of the Earth, and then the Earth revolving, orbiting the Sun, the revolutions of the Sun, and the energy that's emitted from the Sun and affects the polar regions of the Earth. And as the Earth is spinning, it affects the wind and the jet streams surrounding Earth. So all of that is connected. And when that happens, the solar energy and the magnetism of the Sun affects the magnetosphere, which extends beyond the planet Earth, the electromagnetic fields. When those fields are stimulated by the Sun's energy, then it affects the jet stream, the wind moving around the Earth, and then that affects the seasons and so forth. It's the same thing within our bodies. So when we show a picture, for example, there's this symbol called the Smai Tawi. It's the union of the two lands. So what it is a symbol of a trachea, and then on the bottom of the symbol are two lungs. So it's the trachea and the two lungs. And then you have the plants of the north and the south. The northern region dealing with Uatchet, and the southern region dealing with Nekabet, the papyrus and the lotus, basically. The Watch and the Nehem. Now, those two plants are united around the trachea symbol, trachea lung complex symbol, and then they're tied up. And it's talking about the union of the north and the south, the union of the two lands. Now, when we talk about the union of two lands, it is talking about a political structure. It is talking about Upper Kamit, Lower Kamit, Southern Kamit, Northern Kamit. It's also talking about Kanit, Nubia, Knesset, united with Kamit. That's all a political structure, but it's also talking about the electro and magnetic energy in the body. It's talking about the two lungs. So when you see that symbol, the trachea and the lungs, in Smai-Tawi with the two plants uniting together, those plants reference the life force energy, the wind that are in your lungs. So we have a picture of the lung complex, and then inside the lungs, of course, are the bronchial tubes. And the bronchial tubes are akin to the plants of the north and the south in the symbol of Smai-Tawi. Because, of course, the bronchial tubes are what, breathe and pull in the air. And then the air, the oxygen feeds the blood, and the blood carries that oxygen throughout the body. So when they talk about Uatchet and Nekabet, and in the Yoruba tradition, Yaa governing the winds, and connected with thunder and lightning, like her husband Shango, is the same thing in ancient Kemet, the same thing in Akan culture. When you see that symbol, Smai-Tawi, well, first of all, it has nothing to do with yoga, because you'll find that they talk about Egyptian yoga, Wadjet's work, and they say Smai-Tawi represents yoga. And of course, that's totally inaccurate. We put out an article talking about Ankh, the origin of the term yoga, and then Kara Kasa, the origin and nature of the chakras, to give real details about where the term yoga actually comes from. It's just a corruption of the term Ankh. And Kara Kasa, that deals with the chakras, and those terms are not Sanskrit, they come directly from the Medutu. But when you see Nekabet and Uatchet, you'll see them often as on the brow of the Ptah, of the pharaoh, you'll see the serpent, the cobra, the spitting cobra, and then you'll see the vulture. And the vulture is Nekabet, and the cobra is Uatchet. Sometimes you will see two cobras, and they're called Uatchet, T meaning dual, so it's the dual Uatchet, or the dual cobras. That's still Uatchet and Nekabet, Yaa and Aaba. Sometimes you will just see Uatchet, Yaa, and that's why sometimes you'll see the Heru, the hawk, and he'll just be wearing the solar disc with the cobra, just one cobra. That's like Yaa and Yao. That's like Shango and Yaa. That's Yao and Yaa. That's Heru and Uatchet. So sometimes you'll just see one, but sometimes you'll see both. Now you will also see depictions, and we have a symbol of this, or a picture image of this in the article. You will see Nekabet and Uatchet as cobras with wings, the winged cobras. And what that is referencing is, on one hand, they're the electromagnetic energy operating through the magnetosphere. So that the cobra, that wavy energy operating through the magnetosphere. But then they are winged cobras because they're operating through the air, through the atmosphere, through the air that you pull into your lungs, just like the wavy energy affects the jet stream and therefore the stability of the planet. Your jet stream or your winds, when you take in breath, and the breath gets in your lungs, and then the energy is distributed into the blood, and then it's disseminated throughout the body. But as you're breathing, constantly expanding and contracting, you're also pulling in electromagnetic energy, and Uatchet and Nekabet, or Yaa and Aaba, are operating through that process. And as you constantly breathe, pulling in energy, expanding and contracting, you're taking in that electromagnetic force. Those winged cobras are moving through you, and it's generating what we call the kahibit, or your aura, your auric egg. And it's the same, that auric egg that surrounds your entire body, your electromagnetic body, that the emanation is coming off of you on a certain level, is the same as the magnetosphere surrounding the Earth. Okay, so now anybody have any questions on that before we move up? Okay. All right, so now as you're constantly breathing in and out, you're generating that aura. Now you have electromagnetic energy. It is processed through not just your blood, but for us also through our Aaba, through our melanin. And it's also processed through the magnetite in our brains. That's why we have these connections electromagnetically with each other, so we can communicate. Now, there's a difference between communications coming from just basic electromagnetic communications or projections that are always being emanating from your body, and spiritual projections. And this is key to ancient, authentic Akan ancestral religion, or just ancestral religion in general, because regular, lower level psychic emanations are not evidence of spirituality or spiritual practice. They're no different than, on a basic level, cell phone transmissions, radio transmissions, television signal transmissions, and so forth. We can't be mystified, which some of our people are, when we see the whites and their offspring engaged in telepathic communication, if they're engaged in some pseudo-ritual with discarnate wayward spirits and think they have something to do with spirituality, or picking up on somebody's thoughts and we think it has something to do with spirituality. We think they're connected somehow to the forces in nature. We think they're connected to Uatchet and Nekabet or Sekhmet or something like that. We have to understand there's a difference. Now, if you're not connected to any Abosom, Orisha, Vodou, just any divinities, then spirituality is not taking place. If you're not connected to any NANASOM and Samanfo, Egungun, Kuvito, ancestresses and ancestors who are spiritually cultivated, then no spirituality is taking place. Only Afurakani, Afuraikaidi people can deal with the Abosom and NANASOM and Samanfo. None of the whites and their offspring, whether it's Asians, Latinos, pseudo-Native Americans, Hindus, any of them, of course Europeans, Americans, and so forth, none of them can communicate with and get even close to the Abosom and the Samanfo. They are repulsive to and repulsed by the Abosom and the NANASOM and Samanfo. They don't have an Akra or Akrawa, so they cannot connect on that level. So any transmission that they have, whether it's spiritual, pseudo-spiritual communication, psychic communication, telepathy, moving a little energy through their hands, any of that, reading somebody's mind, reading somebody's thoughts, communicating with discarnate spirits, none of that has anything to do with spirituality. If you were standing right here and you picked up a cell phone and you called somebody thousands of miles away in China, this is an unseen force, that's unseen communication from one person to another person. It's operating through the magnetosphere eventually and getting to the other person's phone. Even if they're dealing with satellite technology, it still operates through the magnetosphere. That's not spiritual, that's not spirituality, it's just communication. It's just the transmission and reception of signals. It has nothing to do with the Abosom, has nothing to do with Nsamafo. It's just very mechanical, and that's it. It's the same thing if you're sitting somewhere or standing somewhere and somebody's staring at you, and we mentioned that in the article. You can feel the electromagnetic vibrations because when you stare, when you focus your energy, you have a magnetosphere, you have electromagnetic energy emanating from you at all times, just like any inanimate objects have electromagnetic energy. Everything has atoms and molecules and so forth, and electrons are orbiting and so forth, and as long as they're orbiting, they're generating those pulsations, so they have some form of an aura, and just like we do. So when you project, when you focus your thoughts, focus your intentions, you emanate your energy, and people can feel that energy. It's no different than if somebody's playing some music and you feel the beats, you can feel the vibrations. When you're focused your energy, it's not as heavy as the beats of loud music, but those emanations can be felt. If you're on the bus, in line at the bank, or whatever, if you're staring at somebody, people who are even just slightly receptive can pick up on the fact that you're staring because they can feel the energy. That's not spirituality. It's just transmission of signals. It's no different than somebody speaking. If somebody speaks and you close your eyes, the sound waves travel from you across space, and it hits their eardrums. It forces their eardrums to vibrate, and they process the sounds. That's not spirituality. That's just the transmission of sounds, vibrations. That's it. So, if you're in connection with the Abosom, and you send your energy in connection with the Abosom, then you're engaged in spiritual practice. So we just want to put that information out there so that people are not mystified if they, go to some ritual or watch some ritual on YouTube or something like that. One of the Uatchet spirits of disorder, one of the whites in their offspring, is engaged in some pseudo-ritual practice, whether it's some pseudo-divination, some pseudo-possession, or they come to some region where you are, you go to some false ritual. There's some Negroes who sometimes allow the whites in their offspring into rituals, and they engage in some dance or engage in some pseudo-divination, and they may come and tell you something that you never told them before, and you may think, well, they must be spiritually connected because how could they have possibly known? And all they're doing is communicating with some deceased relative, some deceased wayward spirit, some discarnate spirit who may not be a relative, who may be a relative, or they're simply tuning in to you. If somebody listened to you talk on the phone, listened to sound vibrations of you talking on the phone, and they listened to that and then repeated it to you, and you didn't know they had been listening, you may think that they know something, but the reality is they were just eavesdropping on you. That's not spiritual. It's no different than if somebody is a little bit receptive to somebody's thoughts, because your thoughts are projections, they're collections of vibrational frequencies. If they listen to that and they train themselves to listen to that and work on it on a regular basis, they're just eavesdropping on your own thoughts and repeating your own thoughts to you. That's not spirituality. Spirituality consists of us attuning to the actual forces that govern all of Aabada, all of creation, and then tuning into the divine order of creation, how we fit into that divine order, and how our thoughts, intentions, and actions are either in harmony with that order or out of harmony with that order, and communicate to the person what we need to do to get in harmony with the order. All based on our communication with the Abosom, the embodiments of divine order in the universe, and our NANASOM who give us that kind of guidance. If you're doing that, then you're engaged in spirituality because you're serving Nyame, the Supreme Being, Aminet and Amen. If you're not doing that, it's nothing. So don't be mystified by that. Okay, somebody had a question. Okay, so sister asked, what is the difference between the spirit and the soul? Now in our Akan tradition, you will have the term Sun, that's the spirit, and Akra for male and Akrawa or Akra for female is the soul. Now in an ancient Kamit, the soul is called Ka, that's the male version, and then Ka'et or Kat for the female. Your soul is your divine consciousness. It's an entity, it's a force, it's a divinity, it's your own personal divinity that dwells within your head space. It is a force in nature. It's a little portion of the Supreme Being's consciousness or soul. Now, if you think about your body as a model, you have your body, but then you also have a smaller body within your body, which is your brain, that regulates the functions of the body. It gives the orders and it organizes everything. Spiritually, your spirit body is your Sun. And your Sun, because it has energy and it's operating, it generates an aura from it. So you have a spirit body that generates an aura, that colorful, different color aura. Sometimes people can see different colors in people's auras, but the spirit body itself is the Sun. Inside the spirit body is the Akra, which is the spirit's brain, which is your soul. So basically, it's an entity that dwells within you that you can communicate with. It's your personal divinity. We set up shrines to the Ka or the Kra. In the Yoruba tradition, like Akan people set up a shrine to their Akra So they sit down and communicate with their Akra. The Yoruba tradition, they set up shrines for the Ori Inu, which is the soul, the inner head, Ori Inu, to communicate with the Ori Inu. It's not the only way you can communicate. You can, wherever you are at any time, anywhere in the world, your Akra is in your head, so you can always communicate. But we set aside a certain time and a certain place so we can have a focused communication, specifically because it's a sacred communication. In the Vodun tradition, they set up shrines for the Se, which is the same thing as the soul, the Ori, the Ka, the Akra, and so forth. You have experienced your Akra, that entity, when you are engaged in certain behavior, or you're about to engage in a certain behavior, and you can feel the Akra pulling you in a different direction, trying to keep you from doing the certain thing. Your Akra is always pulling you towards living in harmony with divine order. Sometimes we feel that pull, feel those messages, and then we reject them, we go against it, and we do what we were trying to do anyway. And then it typically doesn't work out for us, and then we realize, we say, well, something told me I shouldn't have done that. Now sometimes messages you get are from the NANASOM and Samanfo, your ancestresses and ancestors, telling you, don't do this, don't do that, or urging you not to do this and not to do that. But they're only urging you because they understand what your Akra is trying to tell you, and they only tell you what your Akra is telling you. They're guiding you, listen to your Akra, because you know your Akra is telling you not to move in this direction. Your Akra is a little portion of the soul, the Ka, the Ka'et, of Inyamewa, Inyame, of Aminet, and Amen, the Supreme Being. It's divine consciousness. So does that answer your question? And we have in fact, the first presentation that we did as far as these broadcasts, NANASOM Ne Amamre, number 1, we go into detail about the Akra, the Ka, the Ka'ed, and so forth, and we get into it. Okay, let me check one thing right quick on the computer. Hold on one second. Give me 1 second. Okay. All right. So any other questions on that? Okay. So now with Yaa, who's also called, Uatchet in ancient Kamit, you will see her wearing the red crown governing the north, and then you will see Nekabet wearing the white crown, and she governs the south. So these are protectresses of royal sovereignty. The Ptah, or the pharaoh, has 5 major divine names, and one of them is the neptune name, or the dual name of the 2 protective divinities, Uatchet and Nekabet. And he has a name associated with those 2, and thereby being associated with Nekabet and Uatchet, he has the authority to rule over the 2 lands, over the north and the south. Now, the red crown has to do with protecting against foreign invasion. That's the, foreign affairs type. Then you have the white crown that deals with the domestic affairs, which is protecting the internal affairs of the nation. So you have both Uatchet and Nekabet governing external and then internal affairs. If you think about that with regards to their forces, electromagnetic forces, the northern pole, southern pole, the energies operating through those poles on the feminine side, you will have the electric, expansive, centrifugal force of Yaa, which is Uatchet, Yaa, which deals with, when we talk about her, fighting, pain, fierce, attacking, assailing disorder. That expansive, electric, explosive, centrifugal force is similar to the energy in your body that will destroy or obliterate cancerous cells, to destroy those wayward cells, to protect the sovereignty or the independence of the functioning of your body from outside invasion. That's Yaa, that's Uatchet, that's Oya. And then you have Nekabet, who is Aaba. She deals with the implosive, attractive, centripetal force, magnetic force of the electromagnetic force governing the internal affairs, and that's very similar to certain cells in your body when they're protecting the body. Instead of obliterating cells, cancerous cells or toxic cells, they consume toxic cells. They take them inward, just like phagocytes in the immune system. They consume in order to destroy, where you have other cells that obliterate to destroy. Some that are expansive in their functioning, some are contractive or consuming in their functioning. Either way, fire can be expansive, it can spread, but it's also consuming. It will take things down. So you have both of those energies within Uatchet and Nekabet, or Yaa and Aaba. Now, because we have their energy moving through our nervous system, moving through our bloodstream, starting out, like when you see the boat of Ra, he's sitting inside the sun. Sun rises in the boat, goes through the whole day for the 12 hours. Then the sun sets, the Aten sets, and then goes through what they call the 12 hours of the night. And then it rises up on the eastern horizon to go back into the sky for the 12 hours of the day. That's the same process as when we have our aura, we have our kahibit that's generated from Yaa and Aaba, operating through our lungs, through the bronchial tree, the electromagnetic energy moving through our system. It gets into the lungs, it gets into the bronchial tree, the winds of the body. It generates that aura for us, and so we have that aura surrounding us, and then electromagnetic energy is moving through the aura. That's the daytime. Then it goes in the nose and goes inside the body and goes through the 12 hours of the night. It's internal, and then it's birthed when we breathe out and gets back into the aura and moves through our aura. So it's a constant circulation inside and outside. It's constantly feeding the inside of our bodies, constantly feeding the outside of the body, the auric egg. Now, as long as we're thinking, as long as we're breathing, as long as we're moving, we're constantly projecting energy. We're constantly emanating. Thoughts, sounds, movements, everything we do, we're constantly emanating. Now, we have the capacity to control those emanations. We have the capacity to control the thoughts. We have the capacity to control, of course, our sound projections, but our thoughts and our intentions, and therefore our actions. When we control them in harmony with divine order, we can focus our projections, and we can repel the disordered projections of others. We can repel the disordered projections of our enemies. We can repel the disordered projections of wayward, discarnate spirits, and so forth. And when we're able to do that, we're able to maintain our independence. If you're constantly, when you're moving throughout the world, and we mentioned this in the previous session, of course you're constantly bombarded with the projections of other entities. When you're standing there, you have your aura surrounding you. When you come into someone's close vicinity, your aura touches their aura. Of course, without you touching them physically, your aura connects with theirs, it touches theirs. So if you don't have a strong kahibit, if you don't have a strong aura, if it's porous, then the energy, negative energy from them can penetrate yours. It's just like your resistance. If you don't have your immune system up or strong or powerful, you go outside, the germs and bacteria that normally would just bounce right off of you would have no problem. Or if you were around somebody who was coughing and hacking and so forth, normally it wouldn't bother you at all. You can be around people sick and you just wouldn't get sick because you can repel all of the bacteria because your immune system is strong. But when you weaken your immune system or compromise it, then things that normally just bounce right off of you, it makes you suffer. You become sick, you become congested, you become, you suffer. The same thing, if you don't have your auric egg or your kahibit strong, powerful, and radiant, it's not repelling, Uatchet is not repelling those vibrations that are negative, that are perverse, that are disorder. If it's porous and you have holes in your kahibit, then other people's projections can affect you. And once they affect you, they can affect the direction of your thoughts, they can affect your perception, then they can affect your intentions, and then you will make bad decisions and you engage in activity that's self-destructive or disharmonious. But when you're in harmony with Yaa, in harmony with Aaba, and when you're in harmony with your Akra, you harmonize with the various Abosom. If you disassociate yourself with the directions of the Akra, then you compromise your spiritual immunity and you set yourself up for spiritual disorder. You set yourself up for maladaptive behavior. So, and the consequences that follow that. But as long as you're in harmony with your Akra, and your Akra actually invokes these different Abosom, then you will have a strong aura. You will be able to repel the negative entities, negative vibrations, perverse vibrations, disordered vibrations, and that allows you to maintain your independence. It allows you to maintain your self-sovereignty. It allows you to govern yourself properly. You can't govern yourself if other people's emanations are affecting the way you think. So that's another reason why Uatchet and Nekabet are protectresses of royal sovereignty. They protect the king, the Ptah, and the queen mother. So you will see that spitting cobra on the forehead of the Ptah, the king. He's always wearing that cobra to attack the enemies. You will see Ra wearing the spitting cobra. You'll see Sekhmet, you'll see Tafnut, you'll see a number of divinities wearing that spitting cobra, and very often that cobra is Uatchet or Uatchet and Nekabet. You'll see Mentu wearing both very often. You'll see the kings and queen mothers in Nubia and Kamit wearing both, and it's usually the dual cobras, sometimes the cobra and the vulture, but it's protection. That protection maintains the sovereignty of the nation, but on an individual level, it maintains not only the sovereignty of your body as far as your health, which it does. So when you're doing breathing exercises, when you're exercising just in general, but you're taking in clean air and you're exercising, doing aerobic exercise, you're strengthening your aura. But on the spiritual level, you're repelling those negative entities, even just the vibrations of misguided individuals, people who are trying to give you information that's just straight foolishness, but they believe is true. They're constantly promoting it, whether they're Christians, Muslims, people who are engaged in politics, pseudo-politics, who are in love with the cracker, Obama, or anything else. They're constantly trying to force those emanations on you. Some of our people, if they don't have a strong constitution spiritually, they get bombarded, become overwhelmed, and start changing their perception and start to accept, like, well, maybe, I shouldn't be so focused on myself culturally, or maybe I shouldn't be focused on this kind of information. Maybe I shouldn't be rejecting Christianity, or maybe it's okay as long as people are doing what they feel is best for them, then everything is all right. Maybe I shouldn't be so rigid. All that kind of foolishness comes from some people who are misguided, projecting on you, but then of course the whites and their offspring and their agents deliberately trying to force this false information on you. But you maintain your sovereignty, self-sovereignty, by being in harmony, maintaining your harmony with Yaa and with Aaba. Now let me see, any questions on that part? Okay, let me get some water right quick. Okay, so let me give you an example of what we're talking about as far as people's projections and false information that leads to negative behavior, and just across the board. So you have some people, and we've mentioned this before, but dealing specifically with Yaa and Aaba, you have some people, for example, on the continent, we talked about how Ghana is an example. People have been told Jesus is the way, don't deal with the Abosom. They have been told the false story that there were angels in heaven, and of course there was a white Jesus up there, and the angels rebelled and they got kicked out of heaven, And when they fell out of heaven, they fell into the trees and into the rivers and into the rocks and in near the mountains and all these different things. And these fallen angels are the deities that the black people worship, because they think that they're real deities and they're actually just demons. So white people have the real religion with the fake white god in the sky, and we've been worshiping demons all along. So that's what they teach people. And some of the people, millions of them, raise their children believing that on the continent, various, countries on the continent. So the mention of Abosom, the mention of Voodoo, the mention of Orisha, the mention of Arusi, they don't want to hear anything like that because they think it's evil, they think it's demonic, and they think it's primitive. They don't want to have anything to do with it because they have accepted the whites and their offspring. Their cohabit is porous, and anything the whites and their offspring are telling them, they just receive it. It corrupts them. It corrupts their perception, and then they begin to project those corrupt perceptions onto the people, onto their relatives, and then some of them will try to project them onto us. Now, of course, we do study. We find out that Jesus never existed, Moses never existed, all of that information. We find out that the Bible and the Quran and the Dhammapadas and the Torah and all these different things are false. We trace the information in the Kuku Tuntun, the ancestral jurisdiction, to show that none of the characters like Jesus and Moses and Muhammad and Abraham and Buddha and Brahman and Allah, none of these characters existed. And we go into detail about that. So we started, black people here, Afro-Akani people, start generating the kind of energy that would repel the foolishness. So then you come in contact with so-called traditional priests and priestesses whose kahabit, whose aura is just as porous, because they're not in harmony with Yaa. They don't invoke Yaa, they don't invoke Aaba, they don't invoke Oya or Oba in reality. So they still have an acceptance of the whites and their offspring, so they're not repelling. And what happens is they will tell us the same kind of information that they learned over generations, sometimes centuries, from their brainwashed ancestresses and ancestors who had accepted Islam 1,000 years ago in ancient Mali or Songhai, or in Nigeria, in the region of Nigeria, like in ancient Kanem and Bornu and different areas, Senegal, places like that. For hundreds of years, some of our people had interacted with Arabs. They embraced the Islamic foolishness, many of them for political purposes, because they were engaged in wars with one another and they were trying to gain the upper hand and so forth, so they would get ammunition and different things from the whites and their offspring, or they just were disgruntled with a certain segment of the rulership in society, and they wanted to ally with a weaker group and try to come together to take out the group that they felt was oppressing them, or that they just wanted to take over. So some of them accepted that foolishness for political reasons and taught their children that foolishness. So for hundreds of years, some of our people have been engaged in the false practice of the pseudo-religion of Islam, or have incorporated many of those tenets into their traditional ancestral culture and have corrupted the culture. And since they're dealing with Islam or Christianity or Hebrewism or something, or Hinduism of some form, they're not dealing with any Orisha, they're not dealing with any Abosom. They're only dealing at most with the deceased spirits, discarnate spirits of their deceased relatives or non-relatives who are uncultivated. These are spirits that live near trees or near caves or near mountains or near rivers, places where they died. There are spirits who are earthbound, who have died, didn't make their smooth transition to the ancestral realm. There are earthbound spirits who are uncultivated, and just like you have here in America, some spirits who get shot on a street corner and their spirit is hanging around the street corner. They die in a house, their spirit is hanging around, or quote unquote haunting the house generation after generation, and messing with whoever moves into the house for generations. Or whatever the case may be, you have earthbound spirits just like we have them here. Of course they have them on the continent, that's the original land, so there are millions of them. And then you have some who were Muslims, died in wars, some who were so-called Christians, died in wars, some who were criminals. They're living, just some people didn't have houses hundreds of years ago. We had small huts. Some people actually lived in caves at some point and then built their own small dwelling places. So they live near these places. So when a so-called spiritualist goes to a tree in the forest, or goes to a river, or goes to a mountain and leaves an offering, and then a spirit comes to them and tells them a few things and works for them and does some spiritual things for them, and that spirit is connected to the little shrine or the talisman that they manufacture from the bark and the twigs and the leaves of that tree, or the medicine that they get for from that part of the earth, whatever it is, they take that shrine home with them, and the spirit follows them as well. And when they communicate to that spirit, they use that little shrine for that spirit to take up residence in. It is no different than if somebody went to a street corner where somebody in Chicago got murdered and got some soil from that part of the street corner, communicated with the spirit who's been hanging around for the past 10 years, and asked them to come and do some work for them. And if you do some work for me, then I will sacrifice an animal for you. I will give you offerings that release energy to you. And as we said before, just like somebody who's a crackhead, all they live for is that rush of energy they can get from the drug, and that's all they will want to do until they die from that. When such a spirit dies and has that kind of lustful energy, all they desire is a release of energy. And if you can kill an animal for them and release some energy that will last not very long, just like a crack high typically lasts for about 5 minutes, and then they have withdrawal symptoms, and then they have to go out and find that drug again and get that next hit, and that's all they're focused on. It's very similar to when people kill animals for wayward spirits, give offerings for wayward spirits, especially blood offerings. That little high doesn't last for very long, but they'll do whatever you ask them to do until they can get another hit from you, another sacrifice from you. So they take these little spirits home, and they start doing quote-unquote divination. They have clients come in, the clients sit before them, they ask the spirit to listen to what's in the client's head. The spirit listens just like they would listen to somebody talking on the phone, and then they tell the so-called priest, and the priest says, well, the spirit is telling me that you're going through this with your finances, going through this with your girlfriend, going through this and that. The person said, yes, you must be real because nobody knew this, I never told anybody, and you're tuned in, you got the real stuff. So these so-called spiritualists are doing this on the continent. They've been doing it for generations. Many of them are not dealing with any real Abosom. They're not communicating with them because they've rejected that. They're on the lust frequency. Some of them are on the malice frequency. They've accepted the whites in their offspring. They've accepted disorder. So now they're engaged in the practice of disorder. Their perception is perverse because their aura is porous, and they've been bombarded with false information, foolish doctrines, and they've accepted it, and now their perception is, warped, and they promote that same warped perception on the people. So these people who look like, traditional priests and priestesses, they may be elders, elderesses, they will tell you, as we said before, that they have 30 generations of priesthood going back in their families. And some of them do have 30 generations of a fake priesthood going back in their families. If you just look at a generation being 20 years, 20 years times 10 is, 200 years. So that's 10 generations, 200 years. 20 generations, 400 years. 30 generations, 600 years. So you can go back 30 generations, that's only 600 years ago. 600 years ago, some of those people were in ancient Songhai and they were Muslims. So going back 600 years, you can go back 1,000 years. You know what I'm saying? And you're still hitting people who were brainwashed Muslims. So if they say I have, 30, 40 generations of priesthood in my family, so I'm the real thing, you can be assured that some of these people have, 40 generations, 1,000 years of priesthood, and they've been bullshitting for 1,000 years, basically. So they started teaching the false doctrine of the whites and their offspring that they learned from the white Arabs, learned from Greeks, learned from Hindus. They started telling you that the spirits that operate through creation, in reality, there are really no forces of nature. Some of them will tell you they're just principles. They're just different aspects of Ashe or divine power that we anthropomorphize so that we can understand them better. But they're just really principles and laws, and they're not really gods and goddesses. That's when you can be absolutely sure that this individual is a fraud. They are a charlatan. Some of them are consciously frauds, and some of them are unconsciously frauds because they're not dealing with any Abosom, and they've also accepted the doctrine of the whites and their offspring. If they're not communicating with the Abosom, then they can't speak on the Abosom. So some of them will tell us, just like the whites and their offspring taught them that there are no really Abosom. That's just, symbolic language. Then you have some who understand that Abosom are real and Orisha are real, but they can't communicate with them. So what they do is, since they're only communicating with wayward, uncultivated, deceased spirits of their relatives or non-relatives, just earthbound, weak, wayward, ignorant spirits, they'll say, these spirits right here, these are the real things. Sometimes they'll pass them off as Abosom. And they will tell us, the Abosom are just like us. Some of them fight, some of them drink, get drunk, some of them lie, some of them steal. So the Abosom, we don't worship the Abosom, we don't worship the Vodou, we don't worship the Orisha. They work for us. We don't engage in any kind of worship because that's not what our tradition is. Again, you're dealing with people who have no connection at all with any Abosom, with any Orisha, with any Vodou. What they're dealing with is uncultivated spirits, and that's why they can order these uncultivated spirits to do work for them, just like you can order a crackhead to do something for you, and you can make demands on an entity that's weaker than you. If you're dealing with the actual Abosom, if you're actually communicating with real divinities, there is worship involved. Worship or wordship or worth-shipping, as we mentioned in the Uben Shane, is provoking their energy. You're transmitting your energy to them to provoke their response so you can harmonize with that divine force in nature. We are not higher than the Abosom. Just like that's foolishness. It's like a cell in your body saying, it's superior to you, and the cell dies the next day. It's absurd. Some people have, the God complex, which we talked about last week and previously, where they want to be the supreme being because they're following after the mindset of the Europeans. In reality, the force in nature that governs the sun, that governs the planet Yaa, planet Aaba, and the different forces in nature, the Akradinbosom, we serve the Abosom just like our cells serve our organs. We're like the cells, and the Abosom are like the organs. And of course, your body is like the supreme being. So there is a hierarchy. The worship or wordshipping is us harmonizing with those forces that are greater than us so that we can learn how to engage in harmonious behavior, thoughts, intentions, and actions on a consistent basis. So if you have people telling you, hey, the Abosom, they're just entities, they're spirits just like we are, we're higher than them, or we're on the same level, and if they don't do what we want them to, we engage in dialogue with them, we're just as divine as they are, and if they don't, if they can't help us or do what they, do what we want them to do, then we leave them alone and we find spirits that can, solve our problems. Specifically, for sure that these people are not dealing with any Abosom. They come from a lineage and from a group and from a set of false teachings that are connected to Islam, Christianity, going back over 1,000 years, generations and generations and generations of false teaching. Just like people for generations, for hundreds of years, over 1,400 years now, some black people have been involved in Islam and following behind the white Arabs who are our enemies, because they're no different than any other of the whites and their offspring. So these are things that happen when people's perception is warped. They can't communicate with these actual forces in nature. When we're just pure in intention, we can attune ourselves to our Akra, of course, and our NANASOM and Samanfo, and they open the way for us to communicate with the Abosom. We can communicate with Nana Yaa. She comes to us, she assists us in our protection, in our ability to protect ourselves from negative vibrations, from other entities, as well as the false thought projections and false ideas being projected by misguided individuals or criminal individuals. We can communicate with Aaba. These are our mothers. We need to understand when we're listening to people who are false priests and priestesses who claim to have titles, or people who are so-called scholars who are writing about this information. You ask them where did they get their information from. What do they say? They'll either give you a bunch of references from basically from Europeans, or they'll tell you they're connected to some pseudo priest or priestess who's been giving them false information because they're from a lineage of people who have been engaged in a false tradition for many times over 1,000 years. So you have so-called scholars, pseudo-scholars writing the same kind of information, talking about, the deities are not really deities. They're just, forces, they're just laws, they're just symbolic representations of aspects of created order and all this other foolishness. That comes directly from Europeans who cannot communicate with the Abosom, the Orisha, so they don't want us to communicate with the Abosom or the Orisha. They want us to worship them, the whites and their offspring. So they have to cut us off from the actual forces in creation so that we will only have to focus on the whites and their offspring and worship and follow what they have to say. So these so-called black scholars, pseudo-black scholars, linguists and so forth, they have no understanding of who the Orisha are because they can't communicate with them because they've cut themselves off because their perception has been warped. So they write that kind of information and they teach that kind of information. And then you have the pseudo-spiritualists who do the same thing. So let's see, do you have, okay, I saw a couple of questions. Okay, so one question, what if you use the earthbound spirits to wage war against Uatchet? Now, earthbound spirits, the people who need to wage war against the Uatchet are here, of course. For people who don't know, in Akan language, the term chi means to hate. Achide means a hateful, abominable thing, also called Achiwadye, which means taboo, that which is divinely hated, divinely prohibited, divinely a divine restriction that the Abosom hate, the NANASOM and Samanfo hate, Inyame hates. And we use the term Achiwadye Fo for the whites and their offspring because they are spirits of disorder and they are hated by the Abosom, hated by the NANASOM and Samanfo, hated by Inyame. They are repelled, repulsed by, and repulsive to order because they are spirits of disorder who have no cry. Now, that's the whites and their offspring. So if you say, what if we use the earthbound spirits to wage war against the whites and their offspring? When we're talking about earthbound spirits who are earthbound because they didn't make a smooth transition to the ancestral realm, because they were disordered spirits, they may not have been the whites and their offspring, but there are some black people who are just, some people who are just controlled by so much emotion or lust, they can't tear themselves away from their family, they don't want to make that transition to the ancestral realm, they're still trying to hang on. Those people are wayward, they're emotionally basically downtrodden, just like somebody who has major depression, or what is called major depression here, and kind of catatonic and doesn't want to move, doesn't want to do anything. Those kind of people, when they make their transition, some of them, if they don't have that kind of assistance or they're not open to it, they'll be those earthbound spirits. We don't work with ritually wayward, discarnate spirits that need their own development. They have their own development to work on. The best we can do for them is to help connect them with the NANASOM and Samanfo. Don't work with them because that just encourages them to continue staying off of their encrabia. They have an encrabia as well of divine function to execute in the world, and they're neglecting it because they're not even transitioning to the ancestral realm. They're just hanging around the earth, even though their bodies have already disintegrated. So we don't work with them, we help them to move on. We communicate and work with primarily our NANASOM and SAMANFO, or our spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors who have lived in harmony with their Nkravia, their divine function, so that, and now their role is to help us. Now, as far as physically, the only people who are to fight the Achiwadifo and defeat the Achiwadifo, the whites and their offspring, and exterminate the whites and their offspring are us. We shouldn't be looking to the spirit realm to try to get some spirits to help us fight the Achiwadifo. The Achiwadifo are not using spirits to help fight us. They're trying to do some stuff. They're trying to, use wayward spirits and things like that. But what they're doing physically to us is what the problem is. When they convince some of our people, millions of our people, to have abortions, that's not them waging war with the spirits. They just brainwashed our people. We're not repelling them. When they wage war against us or shoot people down in the streets, we can easily get armed and shoot back. If we're not doing that, if we're just standing here doing nothing, then they're going to continue doing what they're doing. No animals allow other entities just come and attack them and do nothing. They fight back. So the Abosom and the NANASOM and SAMANFO, they're here to guide us, give us proper direction, so that when we wage war against our enemies, we wage war in a way that doesn't destroy the Earth Mother in the process, but doesn't create disorder in our families in the process, where we're just wiping out, large swaths of our family as casualties, just trying to get to a couple of Achiwadifo. They'll give us different ways to wage war against our enemies that will hit the target, exterminate our enemies, and preserve order at the same time. We cannot abdicate our responsibility physically to attack and destroy physically our physical enemies. We can't look to, especially some wayward spirits who don't even have, the proper focus, didn't have that proper focus in life, and don't have it in the spirit realm to try to wage war against somebody. You wouldn't wage war, you wouldn't gather a bunch of crackheads to wage war against a well-structured army. You're not going to go get some earthbound spirits who are wayward and uncultivated and disaligned and dysfunctional and try to get them to wage war. What you do is you invoke the Abosom, you evoke the NANASOM and SAMANFO to get the kind of guidance that you need to wage war in an intelligent fashion. But the physical war is our responsibility. And we should be looking forward to that responsibility. We should be trying to, we should look forward to that vengeance. We shouldn't be concerned about trying to pass it off on somebody else. Okay, and for that information, if you listen to the Ma'akeru, for those who haven't listened to the Ma'akeru before, we go into detail about these subjects and different ways, that we can accomplish our objectives. And also in some of the different sessions here, we've gone into details about how we can overcome the whites and their offspring, even though they have bombs and tanks and things like that. There are a lot of things we can use. We talked about chemical and biological warfare. We talked about a number of different things in detail. So check out those previous sessions with regard to that. So any other questions dealing with Yaa, dealing with Aaba, but specifically dealing with Yaa? Okay, so for some people who came in a little bit late, we just basically went over the Obosom Yaa governs the planet Yaa, which is called Uranus. She's the attacker, fierce, protectress of divine sovereignty, along with Aaba, who is Nekabet. So this is Uatchet and Nekabet. She brings pain. She punishes disorder. She governs, along with Nekabet, the divine Magnetosphere that governs the great divine body of the Supreme Being, the Magnetosphere that surrounds the planet Asase-Afur, Earth, and the Magnetosphere that surrounds our body. That Magnetosphere is a governmental structure. It maintains, when it's properly utilized, it maintains the stability of your body, just like the magnetosphere maintains the stability of the planet Earth. When we utilize, and the magnetosphere in around our bodies is our kahaibit, as we call it in ancient Kamit, which is your aura. When you live in harmony with Yaa and you invoke Yaa, then you make sure that your kahaibit or your aura is not porous, and therefore her electric, expansive, centrifugal energy that operates through the northern pole of the two poles on Earth and the two poles in your body, it will expand and it will attack, obliterate wayward vibrations, perverse emanations coming from other entities, so that you can maintain your focus, maintain your function, maintain your drive, and so you can destroy disorder and continue moving forward and maintain your independence of thought, independence of action. We also talked about, we mentioned in the article, and this is with all the Akradinbosom, at the end of the articles we talk about different dilemmas that people who are children, specifically of Nana Yaa, display certain characteristics. Now those who are children of Nana Yaa, who will be called Yaa or Yawa or Ayawa, women born on Thursday, and then of course the males are called Yao or Kwao. But because they govern the different poles, because they're expansive, because they're fighters, because they're warlike, because they bring the pain, punish disorder. If people are out of harmony with her energy, and it's not like if they're on the bad side of the Abosom's energy, there's no such thing as a bad side of the energy of an Abosom or an Orisha or the Vodou or the Ntoru, Ntorutu, Netaru, Netatu. There's no such thing. Again, that's false perception that people get from the whites and their offspring, and they just repeat that foolishness on a regular basis. The Abosom, the Orisha, the divinities are the embodiments of divine order in the created universe. So there's no bad side. If somebody is a child of a divinity, if they have a kra that's been assigned to Nana Yaa or whichever divinity, and they get out of harmony with the energy, they're no longer aligned with it, then they will manifest disorder behavior because they're out of harmony with the energy that governs their kra. But when they get back in alignment, then they will function harmoniously. So it's no getting on the bad side of it. It means you're getting outside of the energy that you're supposed to be living in harmony with. So when people get outside, who are children of Nana Yaa, somebody who's a Yao or a Yaa, gets outside of the energy and functions in a disharmonious way, they manifest a perversion of the characteristics that they would normally have. So instead of fighting and relentlessly assailing disorder, they're the kind who will explode and fight over things that they shouldn't be fighting over. They're the kind of people, instead of governing the two poles, Yaa and Aaba, of the magnetosphere in a harmonious, proper manner, it's like the jet stream moving around the earth in harmony with the earth, moving around the sun, and the seasons coming, in harmony. When people are outside of the proper harmony with the Abosom, those two polar energies are out of whack. So they're the people who will manifest bipolar disorder, as it's called in for example, in Axis 1 diagnoses and things like that. They manifest those kinds of disorders because they're on that energy. If they're Nana Yaa's children, they have that explosive, expansive, centrifugal energy that normally would attack disorder, but then they will start to attack internally. Sometimes they'll attack other people who are close to them, explode on people who are close to them. They're fiery like the wind, or Yaa operates through the wind. She's connected to the, thunder and lightning and so forth, connected with Shango. So they'll talk about children of Oya being explosive and fiery, snapping on people and things like that. They're not on the bad side of the energy. They're out of harmony with their mother. And because they're out of harmony with their mother, they engage in self-destructive activity. That's Yaa. That's Uatchet. And when you're out of harmony with her, you manifest those certain kinds of characteristics. And each one of the Abosom of the days of the week they have their energy, and we show what can possibly happen with people who are children of these Abosom who get out of harmony with their energy. And this is one of the reasons why you establish a shrine, an encombre, for your Okra. And what we also do in Akwamo Mind, Akwamo Nation, we establish an encombre for the Okra, but also for the Akradinbosom. It's combined in one shrine. So we communicate with our Akra, we also communicate with the Akradinbosom that governs our Akra, and it's based on the cosmology of how we came into the world. So if you're a child of Nana Yaa, then you establish a shrine for your Kra, your divine divinity that governs your head, and then also for Nana Yaa, so you can communicate with her as well. And especially on Yaada, on Yaa's day, which is Thursday, you want to do that, especially on those days, but also throughout the course, whatever schedule you have. Any more questions on any of that information? We do have a let me put the Ning site out here, because we have a number of discussions on the Ning site that go into detail about this information. For example, the information about the Akradinbosom Encombre or Akradinbosom Shrine. Okay, so the afuraka.ning.com site, that is a network, Ning network. You can join the network. You get a username and your own page basically. But there are a number of discussions that we've gone into a number of these different topics in detail, and people also post things in various different areas. Okay, so the statement Brother made was that black people have to do all the work, then we minds, or I think you're saying we might as well be gods. No, that's why we have to understand the cosmology. So if you all haven't checked it out, look at NANASOM Ne Amamre, Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3, which was the first 3 parts of the broadcast series. And then we started the Akradinbosom series after that. But when we understand cosmology, and the first thing we talked about was the Akra. We have an Akra, we have a divine consciousness, and that encodes our Nkrabeya, our function, what we came into the world to execute. The Abosom have their own Akra. So the same structure of, a person, you have a body, and then you have smaller bodies, which are your organs, and then the cells make up the smaller bodies. It's the same as a supreme being, mother and father, like an Afurakani man and an Afurakani woman, being Inyame and Inyamewa, Amen and Amenet. The organs in the body are the children of the body, and they regulate the body for the entity. Those organs are smaller bodies. They are like the divinities. They are the Abosom, they are the Orisha, and so forth. And then the cells of those organs are us, and animals and plants and minerals and so forth. So when we serve the organ that we're a part of, then we're serving the whole. When the cell serves the heart, then it's serving the whole body. When somebody who's a child of Nana Yaa lives in harmony with Nana Yaa, she is an organ within the great divine body of Inyamewa Inyame. So when you live in harmony with Nana Yaa, you're living in harmony with the great divine magnetosphere energy within Inyamewa Inyame, so you're actually serving the Supreme Being. You have a function. As a human being, an Afurakaini human being, you've been given an Akra, you've been given a function, and you've been given She and Shebeya, which are spiritual capacities to execute that function. The Abosom, they have a function to execute, just like your organs have a function to execute in your body. They have a greater function to execute within the great divine body. And they have spiritual forces in a configuration so that they can execute that function. So when we understand who we are in relationship to the Supreme Being and the Abosom, we don't mix those roles up. It's the whites and their offspring who teach the foolishness that, we're gods and, the gods serve us and all this other foolishness. But again, we were talking about earlier that the origin of that kind of false misinformation. And it comes from some of our people being connected with the whites and their offspring through Islam, through Christianity, even going back to Gnostic Christianity and Hermeticism and all of these corrupt pseudo traditions that are not based on our real traditions. They're corruptions of our real traditions. That's why they're different. So some of our people participated in the corruption that has happened in the past. So they promote these false doctrines, and then our people today are living off of these false doctrines. It's like somebody living off the fumes of, a factory that's poisoning the air, and they're taking these fumes in and breathing them. Yeah, they're breathing air, but they're also breathing in toxins. So that's what's happening in some of these pseudo-conscious circles, and it's kind of like a theology, a foolish theology of we're the gods, we don't worship any divinities, we do this, we do, and we talked about that before. But when we understand our relationship to the Abosom and to the Supreme Being and to our NANASOM and Samafo, then there is no confusion. Okay, so any other questions on that? All right, so we're going to leave it here. If you have any other questions, hit us up on this is our email address. aquamumine@odwirafo.com. And if you are on Facebook, we do have a Facebook group, and the name of the Facebook group is AKANFO NANASOM, but we are on Facebook. If you go to our page, with our AKANFO NANASOM page, so our username on Facebook is afuraka.afuraikai, and the group is our AKANFO NANASOM group. So we've been posting a number of different articles. We have about 40 different articles out, as well as about 11 PDF books. All of those books are free on the Odwirafo.com website. All those publications are free. If you want to support the organization financially, we do have a journal called Nkwamua Whole Life Journal. We have a different website for that, and it's a way that we give workshops, free workshops, whether it's through children, youth, older people. We teach sometimes in schools, sometimes online presentations. We sell our journal, which is a way to introduce ancestral culture to affect the minds and the drive and the behavior of youth as well as adults in an introductory fashion. So we have a journal called Nkwamua Whole Life Journal. There's an ebook that you can download from the website. There's also a soft cover version, so you can check that out on the website. But before we go, has anybody else had any questions about Yaa? All this information, these detailed articles about all of the Abosom of the 7 days of the week, the 11 Akradinbosom, you can find on the Akradinbosom page on Odwirafo.com. And let me just put that up there as well. Okay. So that's our Akradinbosom page. And what we're going to do next week is we're going to go into Aaba, who is the twin sister of Yaa, and you can check out her article on the Akradinbosom page. And that's it. So if there's no other questions, then we will see you next week. It's at the same time. And we will also be continuously posting information and discussions on the afuraikai.ning.com site. Okay, so Medase, and we will see you next week.